Hello, welcome to the third lecture of the 13th module. We'll now talk about Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot and Virginia Woolf. Ezra Pound was born in the same year as D.H. Lawrence in 1885, but lived a much longer life. He died in 1972. He was an American expatriate poet. He came from America, lived in England, and eventually left England and went to Paris and then to Italy. That is where he died. Ezra Pound met Amy Lowell, Hilda Doolittle or H.D., Richard Aldington at University of Pennsylvania. That is where the Imagist School was founded. He was a formal experimenter. He experimented with language, with poetic language, and developed the movement called Imagism. Imagism called for verbal concentration rather than explain and describe. Words should be concentrated into one image and its representation, the direct treatment of the object, and a natural rhythm of the words. These are the elements of Imagism. Ezra Pound discussed the values of Imagist poetry in his works and brought out the first anthology, Des Imagistus. Pound followed the ideogrammic method of translating abstract ideas into concrete images. And he had the slogan, "Make it new." Do not follow age-old conventions of writing poetry. Make it new, write in a new style. The three principles of Imagism are direct treatment of the thing, to use absolutely no word that does not contribute to the presentation, and to compose in the sequence of the musical phrase or the words rather than the artificial rhythm of the metronome. Very famous Imagist poems are Ezra Pound's In a Station of the Metro, William Carlos Williams's The Red Wheelbarrow, etc. Pound was an assistant to W.B. Yeats, and he was influenced by Japanese No theatre and Chinese poetry. Japanese poetic styles like haiku and tanka inspired Imagist poetry. Imagism eventually developed into vorticism. Pound introduced vorticism in The Blast, a journal edited by Wyndham Lewis. Pound's major works are the cantos, Ripostus, the poem Hugh Selwyn Moberly. In Italy, during the Second World War, Pound was a loud supporter of fascism. This led to the enmity of the Americans, and the Americans captured him, put him in an open cage outside, open to the elements, and Pound went mad. This experience has been discussed in Peason Cantos. Ezra Pound was the editor of The Wasteland, and T.S. Eliot calls Pound the better craftsman. Next, let me talk to you about T.S. Eliot. He was like 3 years younger to Pound, born in 1888 and died in 1965. He was a very major poet, critic, and playwright of modernism. He was experimental in writing, but conservative in politics, a royalist in politics, an Anglo-Catholic in religion, and a classicist in literature. That is what he called himself. Eliot also was born in America, St. Louis in Missouri, and from there he went to Harvard for education, and later emigrated to England. In 1927, he converted to Anglican Church as well as became a British citizen. In 1922, before this, he had published The Wasteland in the first edition of the Criterion. Throughout the publication period of Criterion, Eliot was the editor. Eliot's first major poem was the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It is a poem that examines the tortured psyche of the modern man. He is unable to act, he is confused, he is unable to come to terms with his failures, and he is talking to himself in a neurotic fashion while he is perhaps walking to meet his lover, with whom he has a very uninspired relationship. This poem has some stylistic features. It uses repetition of words to create an absurd effect. It has insistent rhythms, and it is, like The Wasteland, a collage of disparate memories and experiences. Gerontion is a dramatic poem, dramatic monologue narrated by an old man reflecting on the times. While Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock had an epigraph taken from Dante's Inferno, Gerontion has an epigraph taken from Shakespeare's play Measure for Measure. The poem Gerontion is about the fragmentary nature of modern experience and existence, and the poem itself is written in a collage-like form. Gerontion, The Wasteland, The Hollow Men, and Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock form the Wasteland cycle of poems. The Wasteland was published in 1922, and it is called a heap of broken images because it is highly fragmentary in form. It does not tell one story, and it does not have one protagonist. However, Tiresias, the mythical character who is neither man nor woman because he has female dugs or breasts, who is neither blind nor sighted because even though he is blind, he has insight, who is neither dead nor living, who has a liminal in-between existence. That character Tiresias, who occurs in glimpses, who appears in glimpses in the novel, is said to be the protagonist. The Wasteland is deeply rooted in mythology, the mythical method, and it draws inspiration from James Fraser's 1890 anthropological book, The Golden Bough, and Jessie Western's 1920 book, From Ritual to Romance. It is from Ritual to Romance that the title The Wasteland has been taken. And there was a first intended title to the poem called He Do the Police in Different Voices. This is a phrase from Charles Dickens's Our Mutual Friend. This phrase represents the absurdity of the poem. Written in 5 sections: the burial of the dead, a game of chess, the fire sermon, death by water, and what the thunder said. These are the 5 sections. Written in 5 sections, the poem takes us through various scenarios of the wasteland of Europe, where there is infertility, metaphorically, referring to the myths of the Fisher King and fertility rites, fertility myths. There is in the wasteland infertility, squalor, misery. The river Thames is full of garbage and dead bodies. There is no spirituality in love, there is physical love, as you see in a game of chess. There are 2 women, an aristocratic woman and a lower class woman, both in very meaningless sexual relationships. After showing us these glimpses or disturbing scenarios of the wasteland of Europe, the poet takes us to Buddha's sermon, to fire that burns our sins, to Saint Augustine, that is in the third section, the fire sermon. And then he shows us Phoenician sailor Phoebus, the Phoenician sailor Phoebus, drowning. So now we come to water that corrupts, from water that corrupts to water that recreates in a ritualistic manner. You drown and get reborn. This is a reference to fertility myths. And lastly, in the last section, what the thunder said, he takes us to the banks of the Ganges river. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the thunder on the banks of the Ganges thunders Da. Da is Datta, Dayadhvam and Damyata. This is like the solution to the problems of the wastelands. Give, Datta is give. Dayadhvam, sympathize. Damyata, control. Give yourself up for others, for society. Sympathize with people's suffering, other people's sufferings. Control yourself. Thus, the wasteland takes us in a very cinematographic manner through a heap of broken images and ultimately unites these images in this argument that the solution to the wasteland, to the condition of the wasteland, lies in sacrifice, lies in giving yourself up and being reborn. So that is the wasteland in a nutshell. It is the manifesto of Romanticism. T.S. Eliot's critical works are contained in largely the book The Sacred Wood, and he is well known for his terms like objective correlative. He introduced this concept in Hamlet and His Problems, where he says that Hamlet is an artistic failure because there is no objective correlative in Hamlet, or a set of objects or a chain of events that help the writer to express emotion. Emotion cannot be expressed as it is. It should be expressed through objective correlative or symbol. Then Eliot talks about dissociation of sensibility. That is the condition of separation of the head and the heart that started in the time of the 17th century, in the time of Dryden and others, going down to the age of Tennyson and Browning and continuing to this day. Even in the modernist period, there is dissociation or fragmentation. The solution is in the unification of sensibility, the unification of ideas and emotions, as you see in John Donne and the metaphysical poets. Eliot also talked about tradition. In the book Tradition and the Individual Talent, he talked about the concept of tradition as a two-way process. Just as the past influences the present and directs the present also changes the past. The present has an influence on the past. You just saw how Eliot changed people's conception of John Donne. John Donne was considered a bad poet. It was Eliot's essay, The English Metaphysical Poets, that influenced the later perceptions of John Donne as a great poet. Here, in Tradition and the Individual Talent, Eliot also talked about the impersonality theory. The poet should be impersonal. He should not put his emotions into poetry. He should not put his personality into poetry. The poet should stay away from the poem. Impersonal. I have to tell you more about Eliot's poetry. He has written religious poetry as well as modernist poetry, such as The Hollow Men, The Journey of the Magi, Ash Wednesday, 4 quartets. All these poems are various expressions of modernity. And Eliot also turned to poetic drama. Sweeney Agonistus was his first play. Very famous is The Murder in the Cathedral, based on the murder of St. Thomas Becket. And he has also written a few more plays like The Family Reunion, The Cocktail Party, The Confidential Clerk, and The Elder Statesman. All these plays are about upper class people and their well kept secrets. And Eliot took up the genre of poetic play because the blurring of distinction between genres is a modernist device. And also, he believed that poetry should be the proper medium of drama. Next, we will talk about Virginia Woolf. She came before T.S. Eliot. I am not following the chronology because I am talking in the vein of who is the most important foundational writers. There is a rationale to my putting these authors together in this manner. In the reading material, we have followed the chronology, and I hope you will also do your own reading and make your own notes. So, about Virginia Woolf next. She was the daughter of an illustrious man, Leslie Stephen, and the wife of another important writer and personality of the time, Leonard Woolf. Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf, along with Virginia's sister Vanessa Bell and other friends, formed the Bloomsbury Group. The Woolfs also founded the Hogarth Press. The members of the Bloomsbury Group were all modernists engaged in discussing experiments in fiction as well as society and lifestyle. They questioned traditional, conventional attitudes. And the Bloomsbury Group included illustrious figures like the economist John Maynard Keynes, the artist Roger Fry, the writer E.M. Forster, the biographer Lytton Strachey, etc. Virginia Woolf's fiction is consciously against the style of Galsworthy and Bennett of the earlier period. While these earlier writers focused on external reality, Virginia Woolf focused on inner reality of characters. She does not write about social reality at all. Virginia Woolf started her writing career with The Voyage Out, also called Melimbrosia. That was in 1915, followed by Night and Day in 1919, Jacob's Room in 1922. That is an experimental novel, the starting point of her modernist writing. We see the character Jacob through the impressions of other characters, especially the women in his life. And the Jacob's Room, the room of Jacob, that is, this man, is a chaotic medley of so many disparate things, which his mother and others are cleaning up because Jacob is not there anymore and he dies in the First World War. This chaotic room of Jacob is a representation of the time itself. She has also written other famous novels like Mrs. Dalloway. It is called a female Ulysses. Ulysses is set on one single day in Dublin, 16 June 1904. Like that, Mrs. Dalloway is set on one day when Clarissa Dalloway is throwing a party, and at the beginning of the novel, she goes out to get flowers and do shopping. Clarissa, in this party, realizes the impossibility of communication, the impossibility of connecting with people. That is a very common theme in modernist literature, the impossibility of connection. E.M. Forster's novel Howard's End had an epigraph, "Only connect," that shows that in this age of technologies of connectivity like telegraph, human connectivity has only decreased. In Mrs. Dalloway, there is a war veteran character called Septimus Warren Smith, who is shell-shocked and suffering from trauma, war trauma, and at the end commits suicide. He is like a counterpart for Mrs. Dalloway. Both of them cannot belong to this society. They are alienated. Then there is a novel written by Michael Cunningham which won the Booker Prize called The Hours. In this novel, Virginia Woolf, the author, is a character. Mrs. Dalloway, the character, is a character. And there is one Mrs. Brown who is reading Mrs. Dalloway. There are author, character and reader coming together in Michael Cunningham's The Hours. Another important novel by Virginia Woolf is To the Lighthouse. Again, a novel about impossibility of communication, and there is the Ramsay family and Mrs. Ramsay is throwing a party. Mrs. Ramsay is like the unifying force for all these characters who come together at the party in Hebrides, which is an archipelago or island, group of islands in Scotland. I repeat, there is a group of islands in Scotland called Hebrides. There, the Ramsay family is getting together with their friends in a party. And these characters are all incompatible. They are not able to connect with one another. And Mrs. Dalloway is like the connecting factor. That is the beginning of the novel. First section, the window. In the second section, time passes. 10 years pass. Many of these characters, including Mrs. Ramsay, die. And in the last section, the lighthouse, is when these characters, the remaining characters, once again get together in the same summer house and resolve some of their problems. Lily Briscoe, one of the characters, was a painter. She's able to complete a painting that she started 10 years ago. Mr. Ramsay goes with his son James to the lighthouse. A visit to the lighthouse that James desired 10 years ago, etc. Virginia Woolf has also written a number of other novels like Orlando, a biography, a fantastic biography of a woman who a man who changes into a woman and lives for hundreds of years. Then she has written The Waves, which is a very unconventional modernist novel where you see the consciousness of 6 characters intermingling. Then she has written a funny novel called Flush, a biography, which is the biography of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's dog. Then she has written The Years. Her last novel was Between the Acts. Virginia Woolf is also a major prose writer and critic. She has written essay collections such as The Common Reader, a title taken from Dr. Samuel Johnson. Important essays by Virginia Woolf are Modern Fiction, The Modern Essay, How It Strikes a Contemporary, Professions for Women, etc. Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, published in 1929, is considered the Bible of feminism. And it is about her experience trying to prepare for a lecture. And she finds that there is nothing much written on women writers. She undertakes a gynocritical interest in women's writing. She wants to write about women writers, develop a history and technique of women's writing. There is a sequel to A Room of One's Own called 3 Guineas. In A Room of One's Own, she famously argues that what a woman needs is a room of her own and 500 pounds. That is the only way in which she can turn into a writer. However, if Shakespeare had a sister Judith, she would have become frustrated in life because a woman has anxiety of authorship. A woman cannot equal a male writer in those days under those conditions. So that brings us to the end of Virginia Woolf. There is a famous statement that she made in an essay, Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Brown, on or about 1910, human nature changed. That is a statement she made about the beginning of modernism. With that, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you very much.